Hello everyone. In this lecture, we're going to look at this object library still inside Interface Builder and see what other options we have other than what we've seen before, which are buttons and views and image views. So Xcode provides us with a lot more than that, as you can imagine, and we're just going to run through those outside of the context of our filter app and see what else we can do. So again, all these objects in the object library can be dragged into the interface builder, but in different ways. And you can sort of see that. These yellow circle ones are usually controllers, and when you drag them in, create scenes. We'll talk about some of these in the future, but most of these are either more of a convenience controller, such as the table view controller, which gives a controller that manages a table view. That can be replaced by a normal view controller and by putting a table view inside. And we're going to be talking about table view controllers in the future. Some other ones are for navigation, which we will also talk about in the future. For example, tab views and navigation views, which allow you to navigate between these scenes. But currently, we're still going to stay inside one scene. So what we are going to look at though are these ones down here. And some of these are very common, and we're just going to go through some of the more common ones. First up, we have a label, and as its name suggests, it displays text. And again, for all of these, most of these are subclasses of UI views. Almost all of these, and buttons are subclasses of UI view. So there's a subclass called UI control, which is a subclass of UI view, and most of the controls which have interactive components are subclasses of UI control. So for these two examples here, as you can see in this property inspector, a label has its own properties that you can change, which makes sense for a label, such as the text. Change it to hello, and it'll update right there. And it has colors and fonts and how to align the text. But it also has its superclass, which is a view. And all the properties that you can set on a view, you can set in a label as well. And to confirm that that's the same, if we come back here and look at this container view we have a view would only have these properties. And so it's the base class of everything we see here. On the other hand, a button, which we just dragged in here and where we've used before, also has its own buttony stuff, like the text and the button image, background images, etc. Then it has all the stuff it has for control, and because a control usually doesn't needs more space around its content. For example, a label, you don't really need more space around the text itself, but a button, you want it to be more tappable. So it has alignment to align content within its space, and also important stuff like its state, if it's selected, or if it's highlighted, or if it's disabled. And then again, UI controller is a subclass of UI view, so you'll see all the properties, all the same properties you can set in buttons and views. A segmented control is sort of the sort of iOS version of the radio button. So we don't, in iOS, provides all these as sort of system defaults, and you see these throughout Apple's apps as well. And it's highly recommended to use these provided controls, such as a segmented control, over something custom, such as a radio button, because Apple thinks they're better. And in most cases, they have a lot of advantages. For example, the segment control is a much more space efficient and nicer looking version of a radio button. You can also choose, it's basically a selection between different segments, and you can change how many segments they are. And it's very convenient to show which one is selected, which is here. So in here, when you can edit each segment individually, name them individually, and set whether or not it's selected. And that's all really cool. Next up is a text field. Text field is also a control. So the difference between a text field and a label is you can users which are able to type into a text field. and you can pre-fill it with, say, hello again. But even cooler, since it's a text field, you can give it a placeholder text, which is what you see in sort of in forms a lot, such as name, and it'll appear like this. And when users start typing into it, they won't see the placeholder anymore. It's a prompt for the content. And there's different styles that a text field can have, and that's all provided to you by default in the system. Next up is a slider, another UI control. We're going to put these UI controls maybe to the right, so you know that they're controls. And the slider, as you can see, is what you would expect. You can specify what the minimum value is on the left and the maximum on the right, and what the current value is. And by doing so, you'll get, in the callback, when the slider is moved, you'll get a value between this and this, depending on where the thumb is. And of course, you can customize its appearance and all the UI control stuff, and also the UI view stuff. Very convenient. Most of these are pretty commonly found inside iOS itself, inside several system apps and the settings, etc. And the switch is another one of these very common controls, which has an off and on state, and some customization options. Not too much to see here. An interesting one that is commonly used is the activity indicator, or you might know it as the spinner, loading symbol, etc. It's basically the thing that loads, that you can display when loading. And so it has convenient options just to do that, such as this option here called hides when stopped, which means that if you stop it from loading, it'll just hide. And when you make it start loading, it will appear again. And that is basically just convenience for you as a developer, so, because you don't really show this spinner when it's not spinning. That's why we know it as a spinner. We almost always see it spinning. And that makes sense to users as well. Skipping a few, we also have table views, which are a very interesting topic, and we'll cover them later. And again, image views. So these are not controls, these are just display elements. And image views we are familiar with, you can set its image, such as this building image, whatever it was, scenery. And you can specify how it's displayed, if it's all stretched, like what it is right now, or content modes, which are here, and you can make it fit, or fill, or simply just draw it in the center of whatever size it originally was, just draw it in the center. All very useful options. Collection views are more general table views that we'll also cover in the future. And here's another interesting one, which is the text view. Similar to the text field, users are able to edit text views if you let them. And it's basically a text field that allows for much more text, as you can see here. And what's interesting about the text view is it's actually a subclass of a scroll view, which we will also cover in a very soon upcoming lecture on how to display content that's sort of bigger than the screen size. And this happens a lot. Say in Facebook, the feed is infinitely long, and there's no way we can display that in one screen. And so that's what a scroll view allows us to do. And it's one of the most amazing things of the touchscreen, and where you can scroll through the content. And in iOS, the scroll view makes this all very easy, but to make it even easier for us, if you just want to display text in the scroll view, you have the text view. And if you want to create a table, which you can think of, say, the Facebook feed or even a Twitter feed as a table of rows, you have the table view. And again, we'll go into how to use these in the future. There's also the visual effect view, which allows you to create a blur. This is very cool. And it's a very unique view where it modifies its background. If I placed this blur view here and ran this, and the background wasn't white, say I placed it over this text view, you would see it blurred, sort of like you see in the system where if you pull up the control center, or if you, in the cases where the background is blurred, you can achieve that effect using the blur view. And that's all we're going to cover here today. Again, there's the normal view. And we're going to cover these gesture recognizers sometime soon as well. And so yeah, here this has basically been a quick run through of all these elements, and hopefully it can come in use in your app.